Hey, what's up guys, aarava here and welcome back to my Let's Talk F1 series here. We're going through all the 2019 car launches and today it's McLaren's day. The McLaren MCL34 launch, the 2019 Challenger with Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris at the wheel, and what a pretty little car it looks like. Very tasty looking car. I gotta admit, this is probably one of the more favourable McLarens I've seen in the recent few years. You know, I've always enjoyed the new orange paint scheme of the McLaren, but the last few cars have been screaming out for sponsors. And so finally now this year, McLaren have rocked up with a plethora of sponsors and a pretty nice design for the way they've done the blue on the orange. They kind of have a bit more of a prominence of blue on the front wing, the back end, and the rear, the most of the rear wing, apart from a little red strip on the very rear end for the husky chocolate sponsor they've got. But yeah, really nice looking car, and aerodynamically speaking, looking like a very aggressive looking car. So I'm really liking what they've done with the middle part of the car. Very Red Bull-esque, but they've also got their own unique ideas, which we've not seen on any cars yet so far, so also a bit of innovation there from the McLaren engineers. So I gotta say, as a first impression, I like what I see, but obviously we've said that plenty with McLarens in the past, so obviously take this everything with a pinch of salt, and let's wait and see for pre-season. But let's dive into this then and aerodynamically analyze this car and see what's going on with the finer details. So we're going to start off with a diagonal view of the car. We've got plenty to look through in the middle part. We're going to start off with the front end here, so the nose cone and the front wing area. Obviously the front wing, nothing to say there, the usual simplified 2019 rule regulations, but they've stuck with this very unique nose design they had from last year, the Spanish Grand Prix, which is the three-hold pronged approach there, and then a pretty big snowplow effect going on there, and quite a unique one compared to the Mercedes car, which is a bit more subtle and a bit more further back on the nose. But there, by McLaren snowplow starts right from the front pretty much, and that's trying to scoop air from the front end that doesn't either get affected by the front wing elements or the actual nose cone going through the holes themselves, trying to scoop air from the front end and trying to chuck it directly towards the bargeboard area and through the front suspension arm. So McLaren retained that from last year, a bit of an evolution with the way it actually merges into the nose cone section itself. And then visually speaking, I actually like what they've done with the entire front nose not being orange. I actually think it works a little bit better, at least for me personally, in my opinion. Let me know what you guys think. But we move on to the middle part of the car now, back to aerodynamics then. So very much like a Red Bull looking side pod inlet kind of arrangement with the aeroplane wings on the top with the small little end plate. Unfortunately, the annotation is kind of covered up a little bit, but a little end plate on the winglet itself as well to try and get a bit of a tip vortice going to get some mixing as it goes downstream. But very much like what Red Bull had last year and still have this year, and very much like I said in the Renault video I did 2 days ago, Renault have copied that. So we've now got 3 teams with this very Red Bull RB14 style winglet on the top for the RB15, the MCL34, and then the RS19, I think it's called. And at the same time, they've gone a very similar approach with the actual inlet itself as Red Bull. They've really shrunk them in as much as they can, and you've got this secondary wing coming underneath, which is a bit more structurally integral to the entire thing, whereas this one kind of hangs over. This one is a bit more of a part of the actual structure and housing of the actual inlet itself and the side pod itself, but nevertheless comes out and attaches the singular end plates on the edge of the side pod face, which curves then into a very floating, I think there's maybe one point of contact here, but it very much on the side view, kind of looks like almost it's floating in position there, but a very nice delicate arrangement to swoop down here to this very unique looking, well, it's like a boomerang wing like Red Bull have, but it's a little bit different because it's a bit chunkier and it connects back down to the bargeboard floor. So very unique design McLaren have got here. So this entire piece, this top part at least, if they didn't have these adjoining middle bottom bits, it would very much be almost like what Red Bull have done, which is take that boomerang wing, which used to be up here and used to swoop through and attach to this point around the car. That's what Red Bull had last year. Obviously, the regulations don't allow anything to be in this part of the car now. So what Red Bull did yesterday with their launch, if you watch that video on my channel, is they have that same wing, but they've just attached it lower and they've attached it to an upright that comes up. Whereas McLaren have made a bit of a shape out of it, because essentially it's the same one piece of carbon fiber that comes up from here, a big slab of carbon fiber, creates the boomerang wing, tightens up and narrows up, and then connects back down to the bargeboard and the floor area of the car up here. So a very unique way of McLaren doing it, but essentially they've copied Red Bull's philosophy there, but kind of done it in their own take and tried to at the same time merge it a little bit nicer, I guess, with the rest of the arrangement there. McLaren also got a lot going on on the barge board towards the leading edge of the floor. A lot of dagger arrangement. I think I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I think there's some hidden ones actually, so it might be 8 or 9 little dagger arrangements, all trying to cut some drag and also try and filter the air through to either the bottom of the car or continue on to the rest of the actual bargeboard area and then eventually the rear of the car. So very, very nice detailing on the McLaren there. You've got the 3 slot gaps here behind the boomerang wing itself, and then on inside of the wing, like the housing, I guess you could say, they've got their own arrangements of winglets and cuts as well. So very aggressive looking car from McLaren on the middle end, I gotta say. Again, like a lot of teams have done, pretty much apart from a few teams here and there, is the way to go about the wing mirrors, which is the 2-pronged attachment. You can see from this angle a little bit better. So this is the main attachment point from the chassis, which is pretty standard, but then they've got a second attachment point, which is purely there for aerodynamics, and you can see the shape they've got, which is an upright, essentially, which is perpendicular to this normal winglet. So essentially, they're not even trying to hide it. They've literally made that attachment point a big old vortex generator, basically, which will, on this tip of the vortex generator, you'll have some spiraling out vortices, and that will mix up the air at the very top and energize the boundary layer on the very top of the side pod and try and keep the air as attached as possible as it goes down towards the rear end of the car then. So a very nice middle part of the car going on from McLaren. I really, really like the look of it. I mean, just not even aerodynamically, just aesthetically as well, looks very cool from McLaren there. But we move on then to the rear end. They've opted to show us the detailing on the floor. You've got 1 or 2 or 3, maybe even, slot gaps on the floor. So that's going to be a big area of development on the car for this year. Last year already was, really, with Ferrari and Mercedes, especially Ferrari being the big ones, really trying to exploit the floor and slot gaps in the floor. We've seen so far in this year's car launches, Toro Rosso and Mercedes launching with some interesting slots, especially Toro Rosso with the big aggressive one. So McLaren continuing that trend we're trying to develop with the slot gaps on the floor. And then we move on to the proper rear end of the car. Now, this is interesting. They've got a bit of a, I don't know what to really call it, a pregnancy bump or a number bump. That's purely just there for the number, I think, I want to say, because I really can't see why there'd be an advantage of having this little pregnancy bump on the rear end, apart from having just a bit of carbon fiber there, basically, for the number. I guess, obviously, it's a bit of a thin-like thing, so it kind of also straightens up air as it goes down to the rear of the car, but I think primarily the carbon fiber flick is really just there for the numbering of the McLaren there. A bit odd, but there you go. McLaren's rear wing, obviously, pretty much every team has copied McLaren's rear wing end plates. These fins and cuts to cut drag and also get some air efficiency on the rear end. McLaren were the one that innovated that and introduced them quite some time ago, actually now. Ferrari copied them last season, and this season looks like pretty much every other team and their mother is trying to copy this. So McLaren, nothing really to say there. They're the ones that pioneered that, so they've continued on from last year as an evolution of what they've got going on. A bit of a crinkle in the rear wing, so already McLaren trying to get a bit of a difference in the shape of their rear wing main plane and get some efficiency by kind of getting a bit of a U-shape almost going on. And then they've got the 2-arm pronged approach reaching out from the bottom. I like to kind of talk a bit like two cat paws reaching out and connecting to the rear wing. So we look at the rear end again and just a bit of a better look at this aggressive rear wing end plate from McLaren, but obviously it would be aggressive seeing as they're the ones that introduced it. But then we circle on to the rear wheel hub, because this very much looks like, unless I'm mistaken, obviously I'm no expert here, I'm just an engineering graduate sharing my passion and some insight into what I can see visually speaking, but it looks like to me they've gone for a copycat of the Mercedes rear hub here. So Mercedes, like I mentioned in the Mercedes video, they've continued on with this design, which was a little bit controversial because at the end of last year Ferrari were questioning it and they got the FIA to try and question it as well a little bit, and Mercedes actually in the end I think blocked it off at the end of last season. So McLaren have copied Mercedes rear hub design here that Mercedes has gone for also this year, which is these little tiny little vents, essentially little grooves in the rear hub to try and get a bit of airflow in that rear hub to improve efficiency of the rear end. I can't really talk too much else about that because I don't know enough about that area of the car, but I assume it's to get a bit of efficiency in that end and also try and get the rear end to work a little bit better with the tyres as well. So interesting that McLaren have copied that. Again here, the weird pregnancy bump, like I said, it might straighten up some air going to the rear end. Then the shape of the side pods. Now, McLaren, although they've gone for a Red Bull style inlet and the kind of array of the winglets, the actual shape is definitely a little bit, it leads a bit more to be desired on it, in all honesty. They haven't suckered in the side pods as much as I kind of hoped and kind of expected them they might to. They've got a very nice undercut going on here that you can see with the shading of the orange there and the way the geometry kind of swoops down here. So nice undercut on the actual inlet itself, but then it doesn't really sleek in as much as I think the Red Bull does in a way. So I think maybe there's room to grow from McLaren there, or it potentially might just be the Renault packaging and the engine, because on the rear end, this McLaren is very open. On the back end here, you can see where the Petrobras is. They've got really two quite large bores of panel work that kind of come out, and so the rear end is quite open. So I think that might be more of a Renault cooling kind of thing rather than a kind of aerodynamic and the team being able to do that potentially. So that's definitely something to be looking at maybe throughout the season to see if they change that up at all. We move on to the middle of the car once again, highlighting that big kind of boomerang but shrouded take on the Red Bull wing for McLaren. You can see the way it connects into this big body of carbon fiber, and McLaren, I believe, are the only team that launched their car, their actual 2019 car, physically in front of journalists, so kudos to them. And I think they're the only team so far that have really shown to be exploiting the full extent of the bargeboard area going to the front. The new rules dictate you can't have anything in this box area, but they also allow the bargeboards to go forward by about a few millimeters there. And so McLaren, to me at least visually speaking, seems like they're the only team so far that have really taken that right to the limit and the max imaginary line they can take it to. Perhaps maybe that's just their difference of philosophy compared to other teams, or maybe other teams are waiting to put on their bits for pre-season testing. That's definitely a possibility, but just an interesting little thing I'll note whilst talking about the middle end then, and just here's the side profile of that one upright connecting with a little bit of contact there, and then you've got the few little uprights and then all the cuts that obviously we saw from the other angle. So very nice looking middle end for the McLaren car, but just noting those few little subtle differences compared to other cars on the grid so far. And may I add, visually speaking, like I said, I do like this whole blue pattern, kind of, abstract mosaic bleeding into the orange. I like the blue rear wing and the blue front wing. I like the fact they've used blue a little bit more in this car. I think it works well, and it's just nice to see. It's not, I know McLaren have taken the piss a little bit here, but it's nice to see McLaren with a lot of sponsors for once, because the last 2 years it's been a very barren and a very bleak car. So I really, even though they have kind of taken the piss with, like every team has this, but they just choose to make it smaller, and I'm guessing McLaren haven't got a lot of money to make it a little bit bigger. I'm pretty sure they just did that on their own accord just to make the car look a little bit fuller, but it works, and it's nice to see all these different logos. Obviously, this is the new partnership. If you didn't know, BAT, British American Tobacco, have sponsored McLaren now, much like Philip Morris, which is the company that makes Marlboro, has sponsored Ferrari with Mission Renault. McLaren have been sponsored by BAT, but they've done it in a way where they've got a Better Tomorrow, which is the technology initiative of BAT. So two major tobacco sponsors back in Formula One, both sponsoring big Formula One teams in a way where it's for a better initiative. We've talked about Mission Renault for a better future, and again with McLaren, better technologies or whatever. Obviously, we kind of know it's kind of almost like subliminal tobacco messaging, I guess, but obviously they will deny it to the end of the days, basically. But there you go. Just thought I'd have a little bit of a tiny aesthetic sponsor talk there with the McLaren car. We look on through from a front view of the McLaren, bit of a nicer view at that snowplow in effect from last year. They've gotten rid of actually their streaks here from the nose cone, which they actually got rid of at the end of last season. So I guess they just thought it didn't have enough aerodynamic benefit for them to keep it on the car, basically, as it was a bit of a slot gap, squirt slot essentially on the front end there. But again, aesthetically speaking, the front end looking very nice and busy on the McLaren, which is nice to see for once, really, in the last couple of years. But we look on then, and basically, I don't even need to really do any annotations. You can see for yourselves how intricate this bargeboard area is, and very aggressively looking. So hopefully it's not too much of a drag-inducing thing for McLaren, because that was a big issue for McLaren last year. They had way too much drag on the car, and they were one of the slowest cars in a straight line despite having a Renault engine. So that's something they need to solve, really. But just looking at the side pod shaping then, and you can see what I mean. They could have suckered in a little bit more. That undercut is there, but not really too aggressive there for McLaren. So they have played a little bit safe maybe with the cooling for their Renault engine, but you can clearly see the innovation and the kind of inspiration they've taken from Red Bull with the styling of those winglets on the top of the side pod and that boomerang wing, which comes across exhaust, which is very apparent from this angle. So that has been the McLaren MCL34, a very tasty looking car. Looks pretty aggressive to me and good to me, but obviously it's kind of looked good in the past as well. Obviously last year's car launched and it looked pretty good, but obviously times have moved on. McLaren have caught up a little bit, I feel, in the barge area with the likes of Red Bull and Mercedes compared to this time last year, with their car looking way more barren on that area of the car. But I think there's still a lot of work to do in terms of, actually just putting it into practice, and so that remains to be seen for pre-season. But in terms of visually speaking, I really like the look of the car. I love, like I said, all the blue added on to the orange. I think it really works well and accents it very, very nicely. And here's hoping it's a good year for Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz. But either way, I think it still will be a tough year from McLaren. But that I guess we'll see how it goes in pre-season testing. So guys, if you did enjoy the video and found it interesting, then be sure to hit that like button for me. Let me know what you thought in the comments below for anything I talked about. If you are new around here, do get subscribed for weekly full-on content. I've done so far most of the car launches so far, so you can see them back on my channel if you are new. And also, if you are new, do get subscribed. Or if you're already here on the channel, later on today I will be analysing the Alfa Romeo racing car, because that did actually launch, because it did a shakedown test at their test track at Murano, I think it was, or however you pronounce it. And so that Alfa Romeo video will be coming later on today, so eyes up for that on the channel. But yeah, this one has been the McLaren video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.